Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us. As everyone comes in for the day, we thank you all for joining us for this month's ScholarCAST with Active Minds. Before we get started, I wanted to go over some housekeeping notes with you all. We are recording this session for those who could not attend, as well as for yourselves to watch again at a later time. We'll get you this recording within the next 24 to 48 hours via email, as well as uploading it to our Scholar Central member portal. To access Scholar Central, you can type in member.nscs.org to access Scholar Central and register for the platform if you have not already. Throughout this presentation, we will have the chat open to discuss and interact with one another, as well as our guest speaker for today's ScholarCAST. If time allows, we will have the opportunity for you to ask questions to our guest speaker. If for whatever reason you get disconnected or you think of a question after the ScholarCAST today, you can always reach out to the NSCS member success team with those questions at nscs@nscs.org. And without further ado, I would like to introduce myself first. My name is Courtney Pomeran. I am the Member Engagement Specialist with NSCS. Thank you for attending today's ScholarCAST with Active Minds. Let's talk about mental health. Our guest speaker today is a representative from Active Minds. Her name is Marky Pasternak. Marky oversees Active Minds' work in higher education, focusing on mental health support for college and university students, student affairs administrators, and faculty. Marky is originally from Green Bay, Wisconsin, and received her bachelor's in psychology from Marquette University. During her time at Marky served as an Active Minds chapter president and was the president of the Student Advisor Committee from 2015 to 2016. Marky received her Master's of Science in Higher Education and Student Affairs from Indiana University, Bloomingdale. And after joining Active Minds as a staff member, Marky worked at Auburn University, focusing on mental health programming and peer health education, and was the co-advisor for the chapter campus at Auburn University. My goodness. We are so excited to have Marky here with us again, and we cannot wait to jump into this conversation. So scholars, please help me welcome Marky Pasternak from Active Minds to the NSCS stage. Marky?
Hey there. I think I jumped in correctly.
Yes, ma'am, you're here.
Hey, great. I can share my screen. Looks like we have couple participants here today. That's exciting. Need to present the oh, okay. Can everyone see okay? Is that a yes? Okay. Courtney, are you there?
Yes, we can see the screen.
Thank you. All right. Okay, everyone, thank you for welcoming me on here. I'm just making sure as I jump in here that I have my ducks in a row. Perfect. Thank you for the introduction, Courtney. I appreciate it. I'm excited to talk to you all today for Mental Health Awareness Month. Active Minds' theme this year is Let's Talk Mental Health. And so that is also the theme of this presentation. And so I feel like I've already been introduced. So I don't need to take the time to introduce myself. However, I would love to hear a little bit about everybody else on the call, so I know who we're talking to today. So in the chat, if you're interested, please put your name, or your name's going to pop up. Please put what school you're from and maybe what year you are in school, so we get to know our audience a little bit.
Let me see. Can I jump on real quick, Marky? If someone could please type into the chat real quick to make sure that the chat is working. Oh, Sarah went in there. There
Perfect.
we go.
Okay, I was like, oh no, no one's typing.
I was thinking the same thing.
Perfect. All right, great. 3 more weeks of class only. That's exciting, Sarah, at Grand Canyon University. Fantastic. We've got Ball State in Indiana. We've got, let's see, Weber. We've got Strayer. Is that how you say it? Strayer University? College of South Nevada, California State, Long Beach. We've got UCO. We've got a mix of freshmen and seniors. That's very exciting. Well, awesome. Well, welcome everyone to the webinar today. I appreciate you all taking the time to come. I hope you learned something. And I just want to set a few kind of ground, not the presentation. So please stay engaged as much as you can just through the chat, because we'd love to hear what you all have to say. And I firmly believe that participation makes all presentations more interesting. So the more engaged you are, the more you'll probably get out of the presentation. So let's talk about Active Minds, the organization that I'm from, before we get started. And so I know I've presented to you all before, or NSCS specifically, but in case you all haven't seen our presentations or don't know who Active Minds is, I do want to go over that a tad. So Active Minds, we are one of the leading nonprofits in the United States working to end the silence and change the culture around mental health, specifically by mobilizing youth and young adults. So we focus on people ages 14 to 24 or 25 years old, which obviously hits college students. So for most college students, there are obviously some adult students, but we focus on that age range. So that does hit a lot of folks who are in college. Our organization is in its 20th year. So we've been around a long time, and have a lot of programs, including our chapter network, which are clubs at different colleges and universities and at high schools now. We also have our own Bureau of Speakers. We have suicide prevention and awareness displays that travel around the country. We've got a student-focused and led conference every summer for mental health advocacy. And so we've got a lot of different programs that people can interact with and learn about mental health advocacy and awareness through Active Minds. So we actually got started in the higher education space, which is why we focus so much on youth and young adults. So Active Minds was established 10 years ago following the suicide of our founder's brother. He was a student at Columbia University at the time and had been experiencing a lot of depression, psychosis, even when they looked back in journals and writings and things. And he didn't tell anybody about it. And I think, it seemed through his writing and that he felt really alone and felt like he couldn't talk to anybody. And he ended up dying by suicide, kind of unexpected to his family and friends and everyone. And at the time, his younger sister, Allison, his only sister, was a freshman at the University of Pennsylvania. And so she took that grief and that pain and she channeled it into creating Active Minds. And she started it as a club or student organization on her campus. And then she had friends at other universities start chapters of their own at their own universities and colleges. And now in its 20th year, Active Minds is on, over 1,000 campuses across the country in different ways, whether it's through our speakers, our displays, or our chapters. And specifically, we have around 600 chapters across the country at different colleges and universities. And so we've grown substantially since being one student organization at one university 20 years ago. So why is it important that we change the conversation around mental health, right? As we focus on Mental Health Awareness Month as well, why is this a cause? Well, here are some statistics that might answer that for you. 1 in 2 of us will experience a mental health issue in our lifetime. And specifically with youth and young adults, half of all mental health issues begin by age 24, and 3/4 of them begin by age 14, and 3/4 begin by age 24. And so there's that 10-year span where even more there's more of a prevalence for onset for mental health issues. And then 67% of people between 18 and 24 experiencing anxiety, or depression do not seek help for what they're going through. We know that suicide is the leading cause of death among young adults, and that half of students report being depressed or anxious since the pandemic. And so we've got a lot of issues that are contributing to people's mental health mental health issues or struggles happening right now. And so we believe it's a worthy cause and focus of our organization to continue to try to change the conversation and culture around mental health to help people help themselves. And so let's talk a little bit about Mental Health Awareness Month, why we're here and why we're here in May. So Mental Health Awareness Month began in 1949. The organization Mental Health America, a community mental health organization, started the Awareness Month. And they started it in order to raise public awareness about mental health for an entire month, use it to reduce stigma, and promote the understanding and education of mental health issues during the month of May. And they chose May because there's quite a few other national days that date back to the 1940s in May that have to do with mental health, like Child's Mental Health Awareness Day happens to be in May. And so they chose that to coincide with what at the time were other mental health focused days that were national awareness days. And so now Mental Health Awareness Month serves for a platform for a lot of organizations and a lot of communities to advocate for improved mental health resources, support services, policies, and programs. And so it has continued now this long for several decades in order to improve mental health care in this country. What I want to talk to you all today about is stigma. And I know a lot of you may be familiar with mental health stigma, but I really want to do a deep dive into what stigma is, why it matters, how it came about, and how to fight stigma, because I think this can be one of the number one ways we celebrate or participate in Mental Health Awareness Month, is by combating the stigma around mental health. And I'm going to convince you why this is an important thing to do. Let's see, we've already got a question, but that was just, it's okay if you're late, jump on in. All right, so the word stigma originates from the Greek word stigmata, which means a mark of shame, or meant a mark of shame. And so it meant a literal mark. So somebody had a mark on them, which means they did something wrong, or they were some sort of handicap to society at the time. So that's where the word comes from. In the context of mental health, stigma refers to negative attitudes, beliefs, or stereotypes that either individuals hold for towards themselves or society holds towards that person with a mental health issue. And stigma can look different depending on the mental health issue, right? So people with OCD might be combating different stereotypes than people with depression, or people with schizophrenia, or people with bipolar disorder. And so what's really interesting is that these labels of having, let's go with OCD or bipolar disorder, were created so that people could get diagnosed, right? They were created with a good cause, because if I go to a therapist or a psychiatrist or a mental health professional and give them my symptoms and they say, Marky, it really sounds like you might have OCD, I could say, what does that mean? And they could tell me, why they think I have OCD. And then once I'm diagnosed, be able to treat me, because they, diagnosed me, put this label on not on me, but on the symptoms I'm having. And they know how to treat that specific condition because of research that's been done in evidence-based practices, right? But diagnosis got kind of had this negative side to it as well, where there's now all these stereotypes around these different mental health issues, because people don't quite understand them and don't understand the nuances around them. And a lot of times contribute somebody's mental health with their character and think, oh, this depression makes you lazy, sorry, my watch just went off if you heard that. Depression makes you lazy, or maybe another mental health issue makes you selfish, or another mental health issue makes you dangerous. And those things simply are not true. We can't judge somebody's character based off a mental health diagnosis. There are symptoms, but not everybody's character who has a specific mental health issue is the same. And so the stigma can lead to discrimination, marginalization, and a reluctance to seek help many of the times. That's why stigma is so dangerous, is because people might think to themselves, well, I don't want to get diagnosed with that so that people think I'm lazy or incompetent or selfish or dangerous or what have you. So I'm not going to go seek treatment. And that is again, the main danger that stigma presents to us. So just a question in the chat. Are there any stereotypes that you all have seen around mental health or specific mental health issues in society, whether it's through the media, through friends and family, in your community? Are there any places you've noticed stigma? I'd love to get at least one participant in the chat, if not two. Over exaggerating. Yes. Yeah. Symptoms being taken less serious, right? So you're being dramatic. Yes. That's one label, Sarah. That's very relevant, is especially people, I think, bipolar disorder or depression, any of those mood disorders. People can kind of write it off as being dramatic instead of being something that the person is actually experiencing, right? Using it as an excuse to get out of things. That might be that lazy stereotype, right? Yes. So stigma that homeless people have mental health issues, instead of saying that our society might not be treating people of low socioeconomic circumstances correctly. And some people surviving homelessness do have mental health issues, but it's not their fault. And why don't we have the resources to help them, right? Okay, so we have somebody opening up here. Thank you for being vulnerable about autism and ADHD, and people may call you lazy. Yeah. And you know what, that's really interesting that you bring that up, right? I think a lot of times when people who are not familiar with autism or ADHD think of those disorders, they don't think of that as being a disorder that makes you lazy. I think a lot of people associate laziness with depression. But because of that issue with executive functioning and working memory that ADHD specifically brings about, and sometimes autism, people might think it's lazy because they think they know more about the disorder than they actually know, right? Because they don't see that as part of those disorders. So they're like, oh, well, ADHD means you're hyperactive. Why would that make you lazy? And there's so much nuance that people don't understand in the education. And so I want to thank y'all for sharing, those of you who shared your personal anecdotes and stories just now. And I really appreciate the participation. So stigma, when you think of all those things, often keeps mental health and mental illnesses from being regarded as valid as physical health and physical illnesses, right? So when someone has a physical health issue, how many times do you see that person's character being questioned? Someone has cancer or heart disease. How often are they called lazy or dangerous or selfish? Yeah, much less how often, right? It doesn't say it doesn't happen. It doesn't say it does not happen, but very rarely, especially if they're diagnosed. How many times too would you see? So let's think about this. Sorry, maybe I'll phrase it differently. If your neighbor has cancer and went into chemotherapy for the first time, or has heart disease and had a heart attack, or had a stroke even, and came home successfully, successfully to recover, you would see people probably bringing over casseroles. You probably see a lot of phone calls of, what could I do for you? Could I clean your house? Could I cook a meal? Could I be there? If someone comes home from the hospital because of a mental health issue or a suicide attempt, how many times do you see people showing up to the door with casseroles or calling to be there for that person, right? That's stigma. That is an example of stigma. And so, okay, so let's see what some people in the chat are saying. Would autism count as stigma? I'm not quite sure what you mean by that question, Eva, but I can try to answer it. So I think autism is stigmatized a lot of times. I know autism is different than a lot of mental health issues because it's kind of a neurodivergence condition. And so I don't think it's stigmatized quite like other mental health conditions would be, like bipolar or OCD or schizophrenia or depression, anxiety, but autism is definitely stigmatized in its own right and way. So Rachel's saying she deals with fibromyalgia and still here she's lazy on her bad days. Yes, I'm not saying that people with physical illnesses don't face any stigma towards what they're doing, especially those invisible physical illnesses, right? That can be hard. And those chronic ones. However, with mental health, it can be seen a lot more times as a character issue, right? And so that is all about stigma. And so how do we combat stigma? What is the antidote to stigma? And the answer is mental health advocacy. Advocacy in general is the antidote to stigma. So advocacy is supporting and promoting mental health as a cause to bring about positive change, challenge stigma, raise awareness, and improve access to resources and support. And so I'm going to go through this presentation talking about different ways we can have stigma and how to challenge that with anxiety. It's not anxiety. Was reading the chat with advocacy. We don't want to challenge stigma with anxiety, with advocacy. All right. So let's talk about self-stigma. All right. There are different types of stigma, especially identified in research as they look into how stigma affects our society and different people's perceptions of mental health. So, and so self-stigma and self-advocacy. Self-stigma is, hey, I can't get diagnosed with a mental health issue because then it will mean I am crazy or lazy or incompetent or weak or selfish or you name it, some negative character attribute, right? And self-advocacy would say, hey, I will make time for my mental health treatment because getting help is a sign of strength and I deserve to live a full life. Do you see the difference in not only the thought pattern, but the behavior of stigma versus a stigma mindset versus an advocacy mindset? Yes. I also want to recognize some things in the chat going on about anxiety, which is a mental health issue, along with some other stuff about chronic illness. I think what we're seeing, so I think a lot of times physical illnesses that present themselves outright to people, or that ones that people understand, have not no stigma, but a lot less stigma than chronic illnesses that people can't see or mental health issues. What's interesting about chronic health issues, and again, this is from the research I've read and my perspective, is once somebody knows that you're dealing with a chronic health issue, the blame goes away. They're like, oh, it's not your fault that you're lazy. They might think you're lazy, and then they hear you've got X chronic physical health issue, and then say, oh, you're not actually lazy, you're sick. Like, that's kind of how that goes. The problem with mental health is that we're a notch down on that spectrum, where even if I were to tell somebody I have depression, they might still think I'm lazy, or think I'm lazy because I have depression, think I'm dangerous because I have bipolar disorder, think I am crazy because I have OCD. You know, the information that I had that certain condition doesn't make them think, it doesn't give them a reason. It gives them something to blame, right? And so what we can do with advocacy is advocacy and education helps people understand that mental health issues are a diagnosable health issue, just like any sort of physical illness or physical condition. And there is not blame to be put on the person for what they are experiencing, because it is out of their control as much as most physical illnesses are. And what they're responsible for is seeking treatment. And if we keep perpetuating stigma in our society and towards people, then it's less likely that they're going to get treatment, or that resources for treatment will even be available. So let's talk about how we can advocate for ourselves. What does self-advocacy look like? Self-advocacy looks like prioritizing your own self-care. It looks like seeking help when needed, and seeking knowledge on mental health. So, right, educating yourself on mental health. So we're going to go through a little bit of each of these to help people understand. So let's talk about self-care. And my favorite way to talk about self-care is through dimensional wellness. And so anyone in the chat ever hear of dimensions of wellness before? A lot of universities and colleges have their own dimensions of wellness that they promote to their students. So some have, some haven't, I'm seeing. Okay, great. So let's go over it. So as I'm thinking about mental health, you might be looking at this dimensions of wellness wheel and saying, I don't see mental health on there, or be wondering, hey, is emotional health the same as mental health? Some say it is, some say it isn't. But think of mental health as kind of separate for a moment, and think about how all these dimensions, as you read them on your screen, affect your mental health. Think of the times that a financial situation might have affected your mental health, or somebody you know's mental health. Think of the time a social situation impacted your mental health, or let's go vice versa. Think of a time your mental health impacted a social situation that you were in. Goes both ways. Think of a way or a time that maybe your spiritual health helped your mental health, increased your mental health. Maybe there's a time when your physical health affected your mental health, either in a positive way or in a negative way. You know, if you didn't get a lot of sleep last night and you're having trouble getting sleep, that can be really detrimental to your mental health. At the same time, we know physical activity is great for your mental health. It's not really like directly working on your mental health, but indirectly going for a run, exercising, getting your body moving is really great for your mental health and clearing your mind and being able to think through things clearer. And so you can see how a lot of these dimensions can affect mental health. So I like to always ask some questions about these dimensions when I present to students. The first is, as you look at all of these, are there any that you have questions about, that you're thinking to yourself, I don't really understand what this means, even with that definition, it doesn't make sense? So they all make sense to everybody? Can I get a yes, some thumbs up? Or do we have questions? All right. When you talk about social, does that mean making friends? Social can mean a lot of things. So I think social can mean making friends. I think that's a way to work on your social wellness, is saying, all right, I'm going to make friends. But it's not only about making friends, it's about deepening the friendships you already have too, right? Investing in friendships or relationships you have. And it's also not just about friendship. It could be with family relationships or familial relationships. It could be with coaches or mentors or teachers. And social just means another human being, right? So any other human being, investing in that relationship is going to be social wellness. Yes. So I think, Priscilla, you point out a good point. You're going to see similarities in a lot of these dimensions, especially the more you think about them. Let's see, environmental health, I think has to do with really the physical space around you. So for example, in my house right now, it is pretty clean and I'm proud of that. When my house is dirty, or messy, I know that my brain might not be in a great place. That's how those two intersect, right? And how I might take care of my environment is by taking some time to clean, making sure I'm taking time to invest in living in a place I feel safe, choosing the people I live with very carefully, right? So I feel good about my environment. That's all environmental wellness, even beyond, what thinking about our impact on the environment. Also, occupational wellness, I think, has to do a lot with work. So your environment at work, environmental wellness and occupational wellness intersect a lot. And you hear a lot about that. I don't like my work environment, or I love my work environment, right? And social with your coworkers might even intersect there. But occupational wellness is about the satisfaction derived from the work that you're doing. And you can see an intersection, again, with a lot of different dimensions there, depending on your workplace. So with these dimensions of wellness, I would love to see in the chat you all, talk about which dimension of wellness do you think impacts your mental health the most? Either in we'll start with a negative way. Which dimension of wellness impacts your mental health the most in a negative way? Social, okay. Financial. Lots of financial. Mine too. Social and financial. Emotional and social. Yep. So seeing a lot of financial, a lot of social, and some emotional. Thank you for saying that. So one way I want you all to think about self-care for a minute. I know self-care, a lot of the times when we think of self-care, we think of bubble baths. We think of going and getting a pedicure. We think of treating ourselves to an episode on Netflix. And those are all really good, acute ways to take care of yourself, right? To give yourself a little bit of a break or a rest or a reward for something. And that's all fine and good. But I always like to go to a deeper level with self-care and talk about how do you dimensionally take care of yourself. If financial stress is causing the most disruption to your mental health, maybe taking care of yourself looks like taking a financial literacy course, or, seeking out a family member or a friend who knows a lot about finances and saying, hey, I'd really like to learn about financial wellness or financial management from you. Maybe it looks like getting a financial advisor. Maybe it looks like saving money instead of going out with your friends one night or going on that trip or using the money towards that pedicure, right? So some things you'd think of as self-care. Maybe you'd say to yourself, you know what? I thought taking care of myself was watching Netflix, but if financial wellness is giving me this much stress, maybe it's unsubscribing from Netflix and saving that $12 a month because it'll actually take care of myself better. So looking at your self-care dimensionally can help pinpoint the problem a little more than just generally thinking of self-care as taking a break. So let's flip the coin real quick and let's talk about which dimension of wellness do you think contributes positively to your mental health the most? Spiritual. Yep. That's a common one. Social and spiritual. Physical on there too. That's a good one. Yeah. So I think a lot of times, it's, you can use your physical wellness to spearhead your mental wellness in a lot of ways, getting exercise, getting good sleep, eating nutritious food, a balanced diet, if you will. Spiritual wellness helps you connect to something either deep in yourself or something greater than yourself. And it gives you perspective on things, right? Which can help your mental health and kind of get you out of that overthinking, ruminating space of mind and think, okay, what actually matters here? How can I get some perspective on this? Social, talking to your friends might be a way of coping with mental health issues or stresses to your mental health, not feeling alone, making those connections, helping somebody else, right? Even just doing community service and helping another person is a form of social wellness, and that can be good for your mental health. So again, when you think of self-advocacy and you think of self-care, I want you to think about it multidimensionally. We don't need to put a Band-Aid on things with a bubble bath. Again, taking a bath once in a while is nice and it's a good relaxing thing. But think about what the root of the issue is and go to that. Maybe it is cleaning your room. Maybe it's budgeting. Maybe it's making a new friend or repairing a relationship. Maybe it's getting in a workout schedule, right? Those are all forms of self-care too, even if it looks as mundane as doing your laundry. So let's talk about getting help for a mental health issue. So we're going beyond self-care and wellness, and we're going into more if I've got a mental health condition or maybe I've got a mental illness. And let me be clear though here too, you do not have to have or think you have a mental illness or mental health condition in order to reach out for help with your mental health, right? There are things in our environment or in our lives that may distress our mental health, like we talked about with those dimensions, financial stress, for example, that you might have trouble coping with on your own. And it's okay to reach out to a therapist to say, I need somebody to help me manage the stress that my finances are causing me. I need somebody to help manage the stress that losing somebody in my life has caused me, whether it's through death or a breakup or a friendship being ended. Maybe you need help managing relationships in your life that are still present, and that's causing some issues to your mental health. Those are all reasons you could seek a therapist. And so how do you know if you need help? If your mental health is disrupting your daily life in some way consistently, whether it's due to a mental illness or an environmental factor, you may need help. Again, if it's longer than a day or a week, but it's been a consistent factor of something, whether it's coming from inside my brain or my environment, is diminishing my mental health, and I can't get rid of it. I can't just, tell this person what they're doing isn't okay or leave them if they don't change. Like they're my roommate and I can't move, or they're a family member. Maybe again, you lost somebody, you're grieving, right? That's going to cause distress for a long time. Seek help, right? Where can you seek help? You can seek help in person, you can seek help online, you can seek help at your school or in your community. And so there's a lot of flexible options. If you want to do it at your school on your campus and just walk right to your counseling center, that's usually available to you. If you don't want to be at your school because you don't want other people seeing you, maybe there's some stigma, right? You can go out into the community and get that privacy. If you want to be in person and talk to somebody one-on-one and you like that connection, in-person therapy is available. But if you need some flexibility or you like to be in your own space when you're talking about your mental health, you can get help online too. There's a lot of options these days. And then finally, if you've never been to therapy, what is it like? The best definition I've heard is that it's a collaborative and confidential process where you work with a trained professional to address your mental health problems, shouldn't say programs, problems with the goal of improving your overall quality of life. All right. So we're focusing on your mental health, and the goal is to improve quality of life. The person you're talking to will collaborate with you as a partner to do that. They're not going to fix everything for you, and they're not going to expect you to fix everything. It's a partnership. And when you're talking about your issues, they're helping you figure out ways to cope with them. And then it's confidential. The great thing about having a therapist is it's not like talking to a family member or a friend where they could potentially tell somebody else. A therapist can't do that unless you are in physical danger of some sort. And so with that, a therapist can be a great person to confide in about things that you might have trouble confiding in others about in your life. So let's talk about finally educating yourself. This is a little bit of a blank slide, but I think it's just very simple. And so where can you find good mental health resources? First, Active Minds has a great website for mental health resources. We've got a ton of information on there. Just Google Active Minds or go to www.activeminds.org and go in our website and look at all the resources. If you want more in-person resources, see if your school has an Active Minds chapter and try going to a meeting or an Active Minds event, and you're going to get information about mental health there. Also, your college's counseling center or health and wellness office probably has a wealth of information about mental health. So when I'm recommending mental health resources, there's a lot of podcasts out there. There's a lot of good YouTube videos. There's a lot of information on the internet or on social media. But if you want to know that the information you're getting is good, check out our website or check out the resources your school has, because those all are vetted by professionals and those are trustworthy resources. Now let's talk about the other side of the coin from self-stigma, right? We talked all about our self-stigma and self-advocacy, how those attitudes, my own attitudes about mental health affect me. And I might not be getting help because I believe if I go get help, I am lazy, I am stupid, I am crazy, right? All these bad things. That's self-stigma. And you can advocate for yourself by educating yourself, taking care of yourself, and seeking help when you need it. But now we're talking about community stigma. And community stigma is when there's a belief in the community or in society that somebody with a mental illness is crazy or lazy, incompetent, weak. There's these stereotypes put on somebody else by a group of people, not necessarily by themselves. All right. So if I'm affected by community stigma, I might know that just because I'm experiencing depression, that I'm not lazy and I am not crazy and that I deserve to get good help. But I might be afraid about what other people think and what opportunities might be taken from me or what relationships might go away if I come out with having this mental health issue. That's community stigma, and it's just as detrimental as self-stigma. So what does community advocacy look like? Again, advocacy being the antidote to stigma. Having a diagnosis. So what advocacy can look like is the belief that having a diagnosis means that the person is getting or has gotten mental health treatment. So that a diagnosis isn't a bad thing. It's a good thing because they know what's going on. And that the community should encourage the continuation of treatment and help seeking for somebody who is diagnosed, and that getting diagnosed and getting help is a sign of strength, not of weakness. And it's a sign of strength because that person getting help can become a more active member of the community because they'll be living a more quality life, right? So that's what community advocacy looks like. So how do we do it? How do we get that belief just viral among our community? One way is through person-first language, changing the way you talk. And again, this isn't about language policing for other people. I think when we're talking about the language we use, it's about a change within yourself to affect your community. It's not forcing people in your community to adopt a way that you speak. But if you want a way to be a mental health advocate and to speak that out to other people, person-first language is a great way to start. So a lot of times we'll hear things like saying, oh, she's so OCD about this, or they're really bipolar, or they're depressed. That sort of language can imply subtly that a person is their illness. I mean, how many times do you hear someone say, oh, that person's heart disease, that person's cancer, that person's stroke? Doesn't even sound right grammatically, right? But why does it sound right if we say, oh, that person's schizophrenic or that person's OCD? So, it's very strange. And so we need to change our language to say something like a person with a mental illness, right? A person with cancer, right? I wouldn't say a cancer person, a person with OCD, a person with bipolar, a person with depression, or a person experiencing depression, experiencing anxiety. These are all ways we can change our language around mental health. And so putting the person first in your language and just practicing that is a good way to communicate and decrease stigma through your own language. The second way we can advocate for mental health is in our own communities through organized advocacy. To start an awareness campaign at your university or at your school through your NSCS chapter, for example, about how it's okay to reach out for help with mental illness, how it's okay to get help for your mental health if needed, how you should be able to take time for your mental health and be empowered to do so. Those are great awareness campaigns. Telling your story. So if you live with a mental health issue, telling your story and being open about it is going to be one of the most powerful ways to decrease stigma. Research has actually shown that is the number one way to decrease stigma is by other people meeting people with mental health conditions and seeing that they either have gotten better or continue to live full lives, even though they're still overcoming the mental health issue, right? So these are all really great ways to advocate. However, it really is imperative that if you tell your story to other people, you either include, again, if you're telling it to destigmatize, right? If you're asking for help, that's a whole different thing. We want you to ask for help. But if you're telling to destigmatize, it's important to mention that you are in therapy and getting better, or that you got therapy and that there was another side, right? And that you've gotten better, or that, you're learning to deal with it, because that's going to destigmatize things. And then finally, advocating for policies that treat mental health equal to physical health. So on your campus, that might look like you can use sick days for class for mental health, just like you can for physical health. You can use the leave of absence for your mental health, just like you can for your physical health. It may be you can use disability services for your mental health, just like you can for your physical health. Making sure those equities are there on your campus in policy is going to be a way you can advocate for your community. So let's do some reflection questions to end our presentation on community stigma. And you can put answers to any of these in the chat. Where in the media have you seen an example of mental health stigma? Where in your life have you seen an example of mental health stigma? And what is one thing that you could do that would fit into your life that you could combat the stigma of mental health and advocate for mental health? Again, any answers in the chat, welcome. So there's depression experienced in family. So creating different programs can help combat stigma. That's a big undertaking, but that definitely is a way to combat stigma. Yes. Seeking your degree in behavioral health or in another field on mental health to help combat stigma is a great way to combat stigma. Speaking up by not being shy about your own mental health, and saying that it's okay and a good thing to get help. Exactly. So Sarah, your answer is great, and because it shows how large you can be a mental health advocate and how small you can be a mental health advocate, and both are very good things, right? So let's say my life's passion is engineering and I'm going to become an engineer and I'm really excited about that. To be a mental health advocate, I don't have to drop my career in engineering and go be a therapist or go study mental health. I can change my language. I can open up to my family and tell them my own struggles and say, hey, it's okay to not be okay, right? You can speak up about mental health in your own life for whatever that looks like. However, if mental health advocacy is your passion and it is what gets you up in the morning and like gets you excited about life and is your cause, then go get that degree in behavioral health or in psychology. Go get a job in mental health. Go organize community events that combat stigma, right? So if you want to do that, you should. And those are very noble causes. I mean, I do it for my work every day. But if you're like, hey, this isn't my passion, but I totally agree with it and I want to be helpful in my own way, then do the small things, because that'll change the culture a lot too, in small ways that people will see, oh, wow, they're really successful, a successful lawyer, or they're going to law school and they don't study mental health, but they're very good at creating a culture that's healthy around it. And that's all of our responsibility, no matter our major, our vocation, or our occupation, or our status in life. So thank you all so much for having me. Remember that asking for help is a sign of strength, and that if you need help immediately, there's always 988 now, which is a great lifeline for anyone who's in a mental health crisis. Otherwise, if you want to get help through your college or university, you can always call your counseling center. Thank you so much, and I welcome any questions if there are any. Oh, thanks for all the thank yous. Hey, Courtney.
Hi, Marky. Thank you so much. This is very informative. I believe our members are extremely happy and excited to kind of get to know Active Minds a little bit better, as well as I do see that we do have a question from, I don't want to mess up how to pronounce your name. So the question is, how can we reduce overthinking? I am one of those individuals myself who overthinks quite a bit. So what would your recommendations be for that self-care that you were talking about before? It's not always having to deal with getting manicures or a spa day as we've seen in the past, but how would you suggest reducing overthinking through a self-care practice?
Yeah, thanks for that question, Courtney, and for the person in the chat. So the first thing I want to back up for a minute, and I think it's important to reflect on if your overthinking might be part of a mental health condition or not. Rumination can be a big part of OCD, for example, and a big part of depression and anxiety. And so if you have chronic overthinking and you're thinking, I overthink literally everything, and it disrupts my life and gets me so anxious or worked up or so depressed that I can't do anything, you might be dealing with a mental health condition, and I urge you to go to a therapist and seek help. On the other hand, a lot of people just overthink without it being an everyday thing, but maybe it happens once a week. Maybe it happens a few times a month and it really gets to you, right? And that might just be some self-care. So like Maria said in the chat, meditation is a great way to combat overthinking. And when I say meditation, I know it can mean a little bit like, oh, I'm overthinking. So if I meditate, will I not be overthinking about that thing anymore? Sadly, that is not how meditation works. I think about meditation kind of like going to the gym. And if I go to the gym and then someone says, hey, Marky, do you want to run a 5K? I might be able to run a 5K because I've been training to run more. Think of meditation like that. It's like training or the gym for your mind. If somebody then says something to you or a situation happens where you're prone to be overthinking about it, if you've been meditating, your mind may be trained to overthink less or to be able to think through that situation quicker than you might have been able to before. So meditation is great. I think journaling's awesome. So if you overthink, a lot of times those thoughts can keep spinning around in your head and it can be really hard to parse them out. But if you write it down on paper, you can see that the same thought that keeps occurring is just one thought, right? And you get it out on paper and it might start to make sense a little. I think journaling is the best way to talk to yourself. You know, I've heard of good people and healthy people, a lot of times in the morning will journal a page or two in a notebook to just get their thoughts out for the day and check in with themselves and say, where am I today? Let's see what comes up. If I journal 3 pages, no prompt, just my thoughts, right? That's a great way to stop overthinking. And a journal is not going to judge you. It's not going to get mad at you for overthinking. The space is limitless. You can always get a new journal if you're overthinking that much. That is okay. So those would be my recommendations. Let's see. How do you deal with fears about not presenting yourself the best after attending a social event or meeting with friends? So that sounds like social anxiety. And man, have I dealt with that before. You are not alone. And I think that might even be an overthinking thing, right? Like if you're overthinking, oh man, I was just at this party and I said this thing to this girl I want to be friends with, but it may have come off wrong, but you don't want to text him and say, oh, did that come off wrong? Because you don't want to seem needy, but at the same time, maybe you should ask, because what if it did actually come off wrong, right? That's really hard. And I think the best advice that I've gotten is like to write down or reflect on the situation if it's really bothering you and ask yourself, do you really think you did something wrong? Or do you think they could have perceived something wrong, right? So if I said, let's say I was at a party and I'm just going to throw myself under the bus for a minute and I was a big jerk to someone and I know I was a jerk. I reflect on that and I'm like, Marky, you were a jerk. I'm going to proactively reach out and say, I'm sorry to that person. Right. Like, I'm going to be like, hey, I was a jerk. But if something you said came off to somebody else is bad, but you don't know that for sure, it's actually their responsibility to reach out to you and to say, hey, this thing you said hurt me. This thing you said rubbed me the wrong way. And then you can talk about it. It's not your responsibility to overthink or ruminate or reminisce on every situation, trying to figure out where you could have said something wrong. Okay. You're going to exhaust yourself doing that. And I think the best way to overcome that is to take responsibility yourself. And when somebody hurts you or says something that rubs you the wrong way, and you care about that person, if you don't care about the person, then who cares? But if somebody you care about said something to you, take responsibility and go to them and say, hey, you said this to me the other day and it really hurt my feelings. And somebody who cares about you is going to care that your feelings were hurt, right? And so if you take personal responsibility for speaking up when something like that happens and trust and put the responsibility on other people, then maybe you'll stop being so anxious in social situations, right? When you're like, what's going to happen is going to happen. And there's always apologies. And we can all take responsibility to communicate how we feel.
Well said. Very well said. I might find myself as well in that situation where social anxiety, sometimes you just don't see those cues, or you say something and you're not realizing how you're saying it and it comes off wrong. And my best suggestion, I think, frankly, you said the same thing, is approach them. Talk to them about it. If you're wanting to get it out, make sure you write it down first and then approach them. Christian asked a question: does Active Minds offer or can connect you to support groups?
We do not offer support groups at Active Minds. We are a group that mobilizes around mental health advocacy. So if you're interested in advocating for mental health, Active Minds is a great place to come to share your experience with mental health and put on awareness events and that kind of community-centered advocacy that we talked about. Active Minds is stellar for that. If you want a support group because you're dealing with something, whether it's an issue of mental wellness or a mental illness of some sort, I would say your campus counseling center or campus health and wellness center is going to be the #1 place to go. I think there also could be online support groups if you look into it. But I would say your college should have a wealth of information on that. And if they do not, if you're at a college where you're like, we don't have a counseling center, we don't have any of these resources, I'd say the best mental health nonprofit that would be able to help you would probably be the National Alliance for Mental Illness, or NAMI. They do community programming around mental health, and they have support groups for people experiencing mental health issues and for people in families of people with mental health issues. So I would turn to some of their stuff in the community if your college doesn't have something.
I did want to mention that I'm going to go ahead and put a link in there in our little chat there in regards to Active Minds relationship with NSCS and getting involved with NSCS and Active Minds, and specifically within your own chapters, as well as on our member portal. We do have a group on Scholar Central that is focused on Active Minds relationship with NSCS. So that's a great opportunity to get updates on Active Minds events and announcements, as well as NSCS events. For example, what we're doing today for the ScholarCAST with Marky explaining the stigma of mental health and overcoming that and letting everyone know that it's okay not to be okay. One other reminder before we end for the evening or for the day is that we do currently have a scholarship open up on Award Springs, and it's the NSCS Active Mind Mental Health Advocate Award. The application deadline, it closes on July 27th. It is a $1,000 award. We will be rewarding, we'll be rewarding 5 individual NSCS members who encourage the promotion of mental health awareness, mental health wellness, combating mental health stigma, and organize mental health programs and advocacy. My goodness, I cannot say that word. advocacy efforts on their campus. That is a word for me I can't say apparently. To access that, to apply for that scholarship, we suggest that you visit nscs.awardspring.com and register for the AwardSpring platform if you haven't done so already, and locate that scholarship under the scholarship tab. Marky, thank you so much for joining us today and presenting Active Minds. For those who have not attended one of our Active Minds ScholarCAST, welcome to the community, and always reach out to us if you have any questions. Active Minds and NSCS are always there to help you out and to guide you if we cannot find those. Maria, Ava, all of the rest of you that joined us today, thank you so much for your amazing participation. Marky, before we close out, do you have any final remarks for our audience?
No, just thank you so much for listening. If you want more information, please go to the Active Minds website. I'd encourage you all to apply for that scholarship that Courtney talked about. That sounds amazing. And don't be afraid to reach out with questions if you have questions about getting involved or mental health. And happy Mental Health Awareness Month.
Yes.
Go celebrate or observe Mental Health Awareness Month in a way that you see fit for you.
Definitely. Well, thank you, everyone. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and we will see you at the next ScholarCast. Bye, everyone.
Bye.